Hey, y'all, hey, we have a disclaimer. Please do your research before you start canning. We are sharing with you our opinions and what we do. There are different practices all over the world, and thankfully, we live in a free country in which we can choose how we can our food. Enjoy! Hey, Monica, did you know it's now even easier to listen to Around the Hay Bale podcast?
What? Really? How easy?
That's right. All you have to do is say, Alexa, play Round the Hay Bale podcast.
Playing Round the Hay Bale podcast on Apple Music.
Ooh, we're really fancy now.
Tune in to Round the Hay Bale every Monday at 9 a.m. Central Time.
Grab a cup of joe and let's gather round that hay bale. With your hosts, Anne from Andale Homestead, Cayce from Ormsby Farms, Monica from Bland's Promised Land Ranch, and Sandi from Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. Here they are. Hey, y'all, hey.
Y'all, hey, we're so glad that you're here. I'm Anne with Andale Homestead.
And hello, this is Sandi from Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona.
I'm Monica from Bland's Promised Land Ranch.
Hey, everyone, it's Cayce over at Ormsby Farm. And, well, we just couldn't let her get away that fast. We are back for a part 2 of What is Rebel Canning with Blue from Blue Self-Reliant. So thanks for coming back, Blue, and sticking with us for another 30 minutes.
Thank you for having me.
Now, one thing that I want to go into and start it off with, because we were chatting kind of off the show, is you had some very fascinating information on where exactly canning started, because we don't really think of, like, we just thought, oh, at the very beginning, I guess Adam and Eve were canning up some stuff in the garden, and maybe that's how it got started. So, but tell us the real facts on that. How did canning start, and where did it start?
Well, it actually started in France, and it was started by the French Ministry of the Interior, backed by Napoleon, who was emperor at the time, back in 1795. They were offering a prize to anyone who could invent a new way to preserve food other than the traditional drying, salting, pickling, so that they could get food to their troops who were much further away, and it would take more than weeks or months to get to them and get extra supplies to them. So 14 years after that happened, in 1809, a confectioner, so a guy who makes sweeties and candy, called Nicolas Appert, won the 12,000 franc prize because he'd spent the last 14 years basically figuring out how to heat treat food in glass jars.
Okay.
And that was literally how it happened. So, yeah.
And we all can be very thankful to him now, because all of us on the panel preserve our food and we keep it. And if that would have never happened, we wouldn't have all of the beautiful pantries that we have. So we're jumping back into quote unquote rebel canning again. And I'm going to start with Anne. Anne, when did you start canning? And what was the reason that you started canning?
Well, it actually is really important. We had about 4 years ago, my Auntie Peg taught me how to can tomatoes and tomato juice. She was just everybody. It was a prized possession in the family to be able to have Aunt Peg's tomato juice, something about it. So she taught me how to do it. And she taught a number of other people in the family that year as well how to preserve it. But it was mainly out of necessity, because as our garden grew, I grew up coming along what my grandmother canned, good Lord, till her hands fell off. But my mother was not a preserver at all. She would have a small garden, go out there, pick what she wanted, and then what she didn't eat just stayed on the vine and died. Well, in our times, we have to preserve what we grow in the garden. So, yes, I planted 30 tomato plants, but I need to know what to do with all of those tomatoes when they come off. So that was the reason why I started learning how to can. And it was a whole new world that was scary to begin with. It was. But once you have a pantry that you can go and walk in there and open a jar for supper, it's absolutely amazing and wonderful.
Now, what about you, Sandy? What got you in the canning mood to can what you can now?
Well, honestly, I grew up with around women that canned. You know, my mom, my grandmother, my aunts. And so it was just something that we did every single year. You know, they all had gardens. One grandmother had a really big root cellar. And so she would preserve all these things from her 1/4 acre garden and it would go down there. In fact, when she passed away, there were different jars that were, by the time we finally cleaned it out, they had probably been down there 30 years. We did open some. They did smell fine, but we didn't eat them. And I think a lot of people have stories like that. But it was just part of my life. And when I became an adult, it was just something, well, you make your own jelly. You don't buy it at the store. You can your own things. Now, do I can wilder and crazier things than my mom and my grandmother? Yes. They liked choke cherry jelly and juice. They liked certain staples. They'd can peaches, they'd can beans. I like to mix it up a little bit. I like to have, my latest jelly is apple garlic. It is just to die for.
Oh.
And it's so good on meats and potatoes and different things. So I like to mix it up a little bit.
Sounds wonderful.
That sounds really good, actually.
Yeah. And so, Monica, what was your reasoning?
I think it was just kind of we learned to grow our own food. Eric and I decided we wanted to make sure our kids were eating healthier and not eating the processed foods that are out there. Even though I definitely talked about eating processed nacho cheese in the last episode. But we started growing our own food and we realized that we can't just put all this in the refrigerator or eat all this food. And so I needed to be able to do something with it. So my thing is here, I can leftovers, which I'm probably rebellious in that sense. Of
She's the leftover queen. Yes.
You don't be canning food that you already cooked up and heated up. But I mean, I'm going to tell you what, that works for us because otherwise we would be in a situation where we had a bunch of food going to waste. And so I'll make a big pot of chili, and if I have extra, everybody knows people be making all kinds of food in the wintertime because they get a bug and they're like, oh, I'm going to make soup. And nobody just makes like one serving of soup. Everybody in the whole wide world makes a big old pot thinking they're going to eat vegetable soup for the week. And then nobody eats vegetable soup for the week. They get sick of it after the second day. And so what happens? You put vegetable soup in your refrigerator and it goes bad, or you put it in freezer bags or whatever. And they're like, oh, I'm going to freeze it. Well, guess what? Mama don't have no room in her freezer over here, okay? I've got beef in my freezer and I've got pork in my freezer. I have meat there. I don't have room for no soup. And so I had to learn. I was like, I'm going to start pressure canning leftovers. And so that's when I really started canning. When I got my electric pressure canner, stay tuned, a whole episode on that soon. But when I got my electric pressure canner a few years ago, I started really canning because it took some of the fear out of canning things like meat and some of the things I would not normally can. Otherwise, I was stuck to figuring out how to do refrigerator pickles, refrigerator salsa, and just putting jam in a jar and going from there. That's kind of what I was bound to because I also don't have the space for it. My stovetop isn't really made for pressure canning. I have an old stove. It's very small and I can't keep the temperature up for a pressure canner to work safely. And so for me, the safest thing is the countertop stuff. And that's why I started doing it really. I started doing it because I wanted to make sure I had food for my kids. And I wanted to have it available and not waste. I was sick of wasting things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what started it.
That's right. How about you, Cayce? What got you started? Because I'm telling you, when I see your videos, you don't can or just like a dozen. It's like 5 dozen of stuff. You can a lot.
I think what got me is because I didn't come from homesteading or farming background. Listen, I was a city boy through and through, and the lockdown happened, which I think we're allowed to say the lockdown,
Yeah.
but the lockdown happened, and I was introduced to YouTube and felt that there was a calling. I truly felt that I was being called to go farm, which all of my friends were like, girl, bye. No, you're not. Nobody want to see you out there on a farm. And I learned, and then I started realizing we're wasting so much money spending at the grocery store when God has given you two hands to do exactly what you're buying.
Right.
You're growing these vegetables. Literally, it's an eighth of the cost for you to get. Now, yes, you're going to have to buy the jars up front and the canners and all that kind of stuff. So all the police in the comments, yes, there is an upfront cost when canning your own food, but that's with anything in homesteading. But that's what got me into it, is truly being like, what am I putting in my body? Ever since I've canned my own stuff, I'm still a big boy, but I've never felt healthier. My brain has been clearer to think on certain things, and I've saved money. It was kind of a win-win. It was kind of a no-brainer. And then I started kind of diving deeper into what can I can. Oh, you say I can't can that? Oh, yes, I can. And that is why we're talking about quote unquote rebel canning today, is because if we couldn't do it, why can you buy it in the stores? That was my first thought, is if we can't do it. Now, yes, I get it. There's the factories that have the different equipment, but if we can't do it, why can I buy it in the stores? Okay. I ain't gonna put my tinfoil hat on, but something no work, Lucy. So that's how I got into it. Monica?
So I think that's where this comes into play. The question is, what is rebel canning? And I think that was the whole idea for these episodes, is that we live here in the United States where we're told that, or we are indoctrinated, I'll say that word, to thinking that if we can certain things, it is against the law. First of all, it's not against the law, okay? Okay? The FDA does not make a law against what I can put in a jar, put in a pot, and boil up and put on my pantry shelf, okay? They don't make laws about what's in my house like that. They make laws on other things, or they help put things into play. But let me just tell you, there's no law against what I can when it comes to canning milk or canning butter or canning whatever. Just because somebody says it's rebellious and you get up in the comments and say how rebellious it is, fine, whatever. But there's no law against that I am aware of. And if there is, please put it below. I would love to see it.
I will say the only law that I know is if you're selling those products, because I am someone that has a cottage food
Sure.
license, and there are rules that say that I cannot sell you anything that is quote unquote pressure canned or low acid. I can sell you jam for days, I can sell you salsa for days, but I cannot sell you canned carrots, which is fine. I ain't got to sell it to you. Just come over to my house and shop in my pantry.
Yeah. So there's the thing. I mean, you got friends that trade up, and we have fun with our friends, and we gift a lot of things. Okay. But that's the thing. It's not about what I'm putting in my pantry for my people, for my family and friends. And there's no law. So what is rebellious canning? What is rebel canning? Well, Blue cans things so differently than we do, but it's still a canning. And she does it that way, not because she wants to be a rebel. Well, probably because she wants to be a little bit rebellious, but no, I think that mainly she does it because that's the way she was taught. To her, it's not rebellion. It's just her life. So who are we to say it's rebellious? And so I think that's why this really came about too, because Blue, you water bath, and we talked about that in the last thing, but on the last episode, you water bath all kinds of stuff, and you have certain things that you water bath, but what makes it rebellious? Because it's not following the rules here. That's what makes it rebellious, right? Because really, when you get down to it, the FDA created these rules here for us because they're concerned about botulism. Well, do you have botulism over where you live? Is that a thing?
In the last 150 years, we've had 67 cases of it. Most of those, 80% of those, have come from factory foods that weren't actually things like that were bottled or canned or whatever. They were things like yogurt. The other ones came from times when we didn't have fridges in the house. So we did dodgy, interesting things like jugged hare and, hot water salmon and things like that were basically left in a tub or a jug, and they were, heated them up with warm water.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more
So,
like
yeah.
sketchy. That's like sketchy canning, not rebel canning.
It wasn't even canning. That's the point of it is it
Yeah.
wasn't even canning, and it's more towards making things like terrines and things like that, where it does need a cooler place to be, So, and we would keep those things in fridges now, where they didn't have those then, so they would be in the cellar if you had one, or in the coolest part of the house that you could find, because the majority of people didn't have cellars and they didn't have a pantry like that. Over here, space even then was at a premium, especially if you lived in the towns and the cities. You didn't have those spaces, and probably 70% of houses don't have cellars, because most of the towns and cities are built on rivers. So you have cellars where there's rivers and streams and stuff, you're going to get flooding. So there's no point in having a cellar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have basements. We call them basements more than cellars here, but we don't have those things in our area. I live on the coast of North Carolina. You're not gonna, so you have your cellar would be full of water most of the time. And so, Sandy, what got you going, and how are things, and what's going on with the basement cellar issue?
Well, where I live here in Wyoming, we have basements, we have root cellars, we have all kinds of stuff because we don't, we're dry here. We're dry and cold most of the time. But when I look at canning, I say, okay, this is what I'm going to grow in my garden this year. You're growing 30 tomatoes. What are you going to do with those tomatoes? What are the processes that I can all these different ways? Like my favorite thing with tomatoes is making my own V8 juice with all the other vegetables in my garden, and I'm canning it, and it is fabulous. And why should I buy something in the store when I can grow it right here, right now? And the quality is so much better.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes as Americans, we can be lazy. And so it's easier to buy something in the store. It's easier to say, well, canning's hard. I don't understand it. I can't do it. Instead of taking the time, getting some really good books, watching videos, asking questions from people that do can, and being safe. I just think it's a process that can turn into this love affair with canning. Yes. It can be so amazing. And you can pull out that jar of, say, tomatoes that you did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you're going, oh yeah, I love that type of tomato. I hadn't planted that in a couple of years. I need to do that again. Right. Because there's just such great flavors, and there's a billion recipes out there that you can use. And so I just don't think people have an excuse not to can. I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, people have been doing it for hundreds of years or 100 years, you know, and it is something that can really add to your life.
Right.
And so I think it's an important thing to learn, a skill to learn, not only as a homesteader, but when you live in the city too.
Yeah, that's true. But I feel so self-sufficient when I'm able to can things. I feel so good I know what's in there. I can read all of the ingredients that have gone into that jar. That's for sure. So, and Monica?
So I think we either chatted about it on the last episode or we talked about it in between. But one of the things that we had asked Blue about was whether or not she used, I don't think she said, I don't know if we did on the episode, but whether or not she used a special pot, right? So let's just say you're living in the city. You don't want to go buy all this special equipment, but you want to start canning some things of your own. You don't have a pressure canner. You don't have the finances to buy that. But what happens if you have a really deep pot? Well, you can still use your deep stock pot. And if you have the jars, you can still water bath can some of your own foods, right? Or at least foods that maybe you picked up at the farmer's market or at the store, right? So Blue, you use a regular like stock pot, right? And you put
Yeah.
a tea towel on the bottom.
Tea towel on the bottom. That's it.
Yeah.
Just a tea towel on the bottom. Depending on how big, how much of a gap there is depending on how many jars I'm doing, I will actually put a tea towel around the outside as well, just to make sure that they're not going to be clattering on the metal. But you don't really have to worry about that so much. It's not as big a thing. But yeah, I used to actually do a little bit more than that, and I'd give them a very snuggly sort of sleeping bag for each one, where I'd sort of like weave the tea towel in and out, and then I decided that probably wasn't the best idea.
Well,
So
I didn't want to pull I made peach jam recently or preserves or whatever, and I didn't want to pull out my big pot because my stove really doesn't allow for it. And so I just used my big stock pot, my deep stock pot that I make soup in. And I was like, I only have 7 of these little pint jars. I can definitely do this, but I didn't have a rack for the bottom of it. So I was like, I'm just going to use a tea towel and do it like this because I know you can. And so I might as well. And so I did. And my son was like, why did you put a towel on the bottom? I'm like, I don't know exactly why, but I think this is what I'm supposed to do.
It's because as the water boils, it creates like the air and the gas starts popping up from underneath. And if you don't have the tea towel there, then you're liable to end up with clattering. So your likelihood is that you could end up with a few cracked jars, which, let's be honest, nobody wants. It's not anything that anyone wants, When we do our preserving, it's usually after we've done a trip to somewhere like Kirkgate Markets in Leeds, where we get cut price vegetables in the boxes. So you get the blue baskets of mushrooms, with about like a 5 kilo box of mushrooms, and we were picking them up for £2 or $2, whatever you want to call it, a basket. So we got like 3 of them. Like, you're coming home with us, thank you, because a 500 gram, or I think that's like a pound in imperial measurements, a pound of mushrooms over here is like £1. It's like $1, $2, depending on where you are, so we can't afford to do that. And the price of the food that you get in the supermarkets is ridiculous. It goes off in 2 or 3 days. But if we go to the markets, we can fill the car. It'll cost us like 40, 50 quid. And we come home and we've got enough food that we can preserve and put on the shelves for at least 3 to 6 months. That's the point of it. That's why we do it, because we just can't afford to do it otherwise.
Now, I have a question for you ladies, because we talked a little bit about canning milk before. That's one of the big rebellious things here in America is canning dairy. Have any of y'all canned milk before? And have any of y'all tried canning the powdered milk that you turn back into milk, like freeze-dried milk powder? So Monica looks like she really wants to answer it first.
No, I have not canned milk, and I've not canned reconstituted freeze-dried powdered milk, because I'm like so afraid to waste it and mess it up. So I have desired to do it, but then I was like, nah, I'm good. It's already powdered. I'm just going to leave it like it is. I don't need to go through all that. So I haven't. And not to mention, we're not big milk people here. I have freeze-dried milk. I have it for necessity, like, for later if I needed it, but we don't drink a lot of milk here. We have almond milk. We drink a lot of plant-based milks because we have some dairy intolerances. So yeah.
What about you, Sandi?
Well, I've canned butter, but I haven't canned milk before. But one thing I wanted to just push in there is that you have to know your stove. Like, if you have a glass top stove, the manufacturer will not guarantee if you can on it. So if it would crack, it's too bad, you're buying a new stove. because it doesn't heat right for canning. So you have to be careful with that. Now, that said, we have like a propane burner that we have outside that like you would cook a turkey with, you know.
Right.
And I've canned on that when it's 100 degrees and I need to can something. I just take that out there because it's a constant heat. And so it can go up to my temperatures that I need. So it's not like you can't do it. You can do it. I think even Blue has sometimes done it on a fire, you know, because I don't want to heat my kitchen up to 120 degrees when I'm canning. And so I just look at other options of what I can do.
I got you. And so, Blue, as far have you done water bath canning on a fire in a not on
I
your
have.
good.
I have. There was one point when my kids were little. I had, I think one of them was like 2 and the other one was 7. And I wasn't able to pay the electric and gas bill. So, because we had gas bottles that had to be heated, that had to be bought when we needed them. But I was like 10 days away from having any money. So I used the fire pit. I wasn't going to let the food go off. So I just used the fire pit for water bath canning. But yeah, what you're saying about the glass top stoves, that be really careful with that, especially with water bath canning, because the weight of the pot and the jars will absolutely at some point crack your stove.
Wow. Even on water bath canning. See, I thought
it's because the weight of it all. You think about it. If you've got, say, my big stock pot is a 30-liter stock pot, which is like, so it's about 15 gallon, 15 gallon.
Okay.
Right. So I use that, and then you've got to put all your jars in there. Well, that holds like 20 what you would call quart jars, and then all the water on top of that plus 2 inches, because I always use 2 inches. That's a heck of a weight.
It is.
I mean, I can't lift that.
Right.
That has to be filled up with me basically standing on a box. Okay, so it's like so yeah, you've got to just watch it. But we've got a gas stove here, but I've used the fire pit.
Okay.
Really well.
That's one reason why I use a steam canner, because it's so much lighter and it's just like 2 inches of water, and it's very light. Because I am not as strong as I used to be. I don't have to have my husband right there beside me to be able to pick up the pan. I can dump the water or do whatever, and it seems to can just as good as water bath canning as far as, but with something that we're going to go for a long time, like meat or something like that, that would not be really recommended or feasible, because you're going to be replacing that water all the time. And in order to do that, you have to remove the lid. So, but anyway, so Cayce, how's everything going and what you going to do for us, darling?
Well, let me just say, I love steam bathing too. Again, we're going to be talking about that on another episode, the battle between water bathing and steam bathing. But it's true. I mean, when I moved out to this farm, I have currently a glass top stove, and I've gotten so much away from having that heavy pressure canner or water bath canner on there. Because I don't want to, nor can I afford to buy another stove, which is what really got me into electric pressure canning and electric steam bath canning, because I can put it on, I can plug it in, I can set her, and I can go watch an episode of Downton Abbey and be happy as a lark, canning my own food. So I find this topic so fascinating. And of course, I think all of us could probably chit chat on quote unquote rebel canning for hours and hours and hours to come. But we want to thank Blue again for coming in for our second part 2 of what is rebel canning. And we hope you're enjoying these podcasts. This is Blue has welcomed us into the canning season now. So we have much more canning episodes coming that we hope you turn into. And I hope you tune in Friday for our afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you're listening from, radio show. Hey, y'all. Hey. And stay tuned. Make sure to follow Blue on social media. Go show her some love. Type in the comment that the Hey Balers sent you over there. She's wonderful. She's a wealth of knowledge, and we are just so excited to have had her on for 2 episodes. So we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And until then, bye, y'all, bye.
Are you enjoying the Hey Bale topics? To learn more, click on the LinkTree link to get all our product recommendations, along with discount codes and more.